Awesome. So I'm Kristi Fairholm Mader, and I am with an organization called Scale Collaborative. I am located here on the Algonquin-speaking traditional territories of the Songhees Esquimalt Nations, and I am very thankful to get to live and work and play, and very thankful to very shortly be coming up to having holiday here. So, and I want to appreciate everybody who joined us. I know this is for lots of folks, it's our last week. Some people work next week too, but it's always at holiday season arriving. It's fantastic that folks have decided to join us to talk about zero waste, which is a critical thing in our world and for many of the communities that we work with. So I'll introduce Sue and Jane shortly. But before we do so, I'm going to talk a little bit about the BC Social Procurement Initiative. So I work with Scale Collaborative, and Scale Collaborative is one of the project partners for the BC Social Procurement Initiative in delivering services. And BCSPI is for governments, by governments, and focused on small and medium-sized governments here in BC. And it's really looking at how can local governments and institutional purchasers align their procurement dollars to their strategic directions and their strategic goals, primarily in the areas of social and environmental outcomes. It is governed by local governments and a steering committee approach. And we have Jane here from City of Nanaimo, who's one of the members and is on a steering committee. So it's really guided and meets the needs of local governments. And then we really look at, trying to hold that true and to make sure that we take that governance seriously and have it integrated into all the work that we do. And we have a lot of member benefits. So the project is about building capacity in staff and at council and in community in order to respond to and again align that procurement to the strategic goals of communities. And so we provide education, training, and development in the project. We do one-to-one coaching and consulting around specific RFPs or outreach to vendor communities. We can help with initial project reviews. We look at the tools and templates and resources that allow for local governments to build on best practices of other local governments and of the members. We do community of practices. We have a massive bank of webinars and resources. We do impact measurement and have an impact measurement framework that our members can draw upon. And so there's lots of wraparound and capacity building supports and services that support organizations to enact and enable their social procurement and outcomes there. And so this project's been going for about 4 years. And in the time we have 35 members as partners. We've trained over 150 member staff, and that's staff within our members. But beyond that, we've also trained over 800 people generally just on what social procurement can look like, of which this project or this series, the Purchasing Power series, is part of. So, and so it's taking that wider look and asking, what are the issues that local governments and communities are worried about right now, and how do we support procurement to help address those? And also within the project, we've looked at, probably mobilizing about over $350 million in procurement spend that's been aligned to strategic goals with about 450 projects. So it's a lot that's happened. And if you're interested in becoming a member or learning more, you can hop on our website and take a look and reach out at any time. So I'm going to stop sharing and I'm going to introduce our amazing speakers today. And give me just 1 second. So I want to just be really thankful to both Sue and Jane for joining us. Sue Maxwell is with Zero Waste BC. Sue has been involved with Zero Waste BC since its inception, as well as has volunteered with many other organizations, including the Recycling Council of BC, the Sea to Sky Clean Air Association, the Climate Caucus, and AWARE. She works as a sustainability consultant with a specialty of zero waste, having developed zero waste strategies and helped form a new extended producer responsibility programs. And she served as a counselor for Whistler for 1 term. So thank you, Jane. Thank you, Sue, for joining us. And Jane is the manager of purchasing and stores for the City of Nanaimo. Jane Rushton has 30 plus years of experience in procurement and is currently that purchasing and stores manager. Under Jane's leadership, the city has been working on creating a fulsome sustainable procurement policy since 2019. Milestones under this program include City Council approval of the city's sustainable policy that aims to leverage procurement activities to advance a range of environmental, social, and ethical objectives from the city's strategic plan, and to further align procurement within the city's core vision of being a livable, sustainable city. So welcome, Jane. So we're gonna have a conversation for probably about 35 minutes. And we'll go back and forth 35 to 40 minutes, and then we'll open it up for questions, but also feel free to pop questions into the chat. And we'll, as things come up, we can stop and take a look and answer them in the moment. And we also might be able to, we'll also, make sure that we pick up those questions as we come around to the end. So let's start with Sue. So I'm wondering if you can give that high level overview of what is zero waste and why is it important?
Sure. So zero waste is defined by the Zero Waste International Alliance as the conservation of all resources by means of responsible production, consumption, reuse, and recovery of products, packaging, and materials without burning them and with no discharges to land, water, or air that would threaten the environment or human health. This is fleshed out in a bit more detail in the zero waste hierarchy. So you really want to start with the rethink, redesign level, then reduce, then reuse, then recycling or composting, and then material recovery and residuals management. There's also a level of unacceptable, which would be things like incineration or waste to energy, pyrolysis, chemical recycling to fuel, putting things in cement kilns, but essentially ways that materials are destroyed. It has many of the same underpinning principles as circular economy, which is also gaining a lot of steam. So it's very similar, but historically zero waste has been more closely tied towards municipal and regional governments, and circular economy has worked a bit more with businesses, but both of them are coming together with a lot of traction. And it's important because although it says zero waste, it's not just about reducing waste, it's really about reducing the throughput of materials. Because we did a study and looked at waste from 2010 to 2018, and we increased our recycling and composting, which was awesome, but the amount of materials we threw away was the same because we increased our throughput of materials by 37%, 23% per capita, because we had some people move to BC, but 23% in 8 years is a big increase. And all of the materials have an ecological and social footprint of them. And so when we recognize that waste is a symptom, just along with climate change, soil nutrient loss, habitat loss, loss of biodiversity, and pollution of air, land, and water, and most of our planetary health indicators are blinking orange, if not red, that it's really important to think of these broader set of symptoms that we can address by pursuing zero waste or a circular economy. And so climate change is often really closely linked to waste because there's greenhouse gas emissions at every step, production through to manufacturing to use and then disposal. And so in the US, when they did a study, 44% of emissions were related to products and packaging and another 12% related to food. So that's why it's so important that we start to change the way we consume things.
I'm wondering if you can talk just a little bit more about when you saw that increase of 23% of waste. What grew? Like what's changed, or where's the most what makes up that 23% of growth in waste?
I think it's a little bit of everything. But I think it's also an increase in single-use products. It's products that aren't designed to last very long. Fast fashion, where we went from having, maybe 1 or 2 seasons to having, some companies say they have weeks of like, oh, that was last week's fashion and now we're into this week's fashion. I think it's about how quickly we decide that a building isn't useful anymore and we tear it down versus repairing, renovating or fixing the building, but also with products, whether repair is available or not. And so it seems sometimes that the cheaper we make things, the less value they have to us. And then we are comfortable just getting something new and it's not worth it. And it's really hard sometimes to be able to repair things. Sometimes it's about how things are packaged. My sister went to a grocery store and you could only get 5 cucumbers at a time. She only needed 1 or 2. So that kind of also pushes us towards more waste.
Great. Thanks, Sue. Jane, how does the City of Nanaimo define zero waste?
Thank you. Thank you, Sue, for framing that, because that's where we want to be, but that's not where we are. So for the city, creating an economy that looks to use and reuse and disassemble and avoid the landfill will be the focus going forward. And even though the city, and specifically the city sanitation department, has been talking this talk and taking action on this for a considerable length of time, we've yet to define our own zero waste. So what does that look like for the city of Nanaimo? And in hearing all these, this work that's gone before us is really, really going to help us get there. The real good news, however, is that we've recently hired a zero waste coordinator who comes with a wealth of knowledge, and that and I feel that that's a milestone for the city of Nanaimo in moving us forward and getting us to where we need to be. And having that dedicated resource who can tackle the issues and the specifics is long overdue. But we look forward to working together and believe that we can achieve and ensure we're meeting the objectives of the city's strategic plan. And under our newly elected council, I believe their focus will be moving away from that linear economy where natural resources are used and then thrown away, to a more sustainable, and again, the word circular economy, those words keep resonating with council, and they're really going to push and really call to action the city to move that forward. So thank you, Sue, for framing it. I wish we were there, but we've got a long way to go. So thank you for that.
So Jane, building on what Sue was talking about, some of the things that is that increase of waste, what do you see as the most waste produced by municipal purchasing?
Yeah, so procurement, sorry, and it's going to sound, I'm going to sound like a broken record, but we're going to really rely on the zero waste coordinator to help us identify that. It's a milestone that we have to get there. We can't continue to say, do as I say, not as I do. We have to frame this for the city of Nanaimo. We have to walk the walk. And so we're definitely in a transitional stage right now, and it's going to be pivotal for our zero waste coordinator. I may be placing a lot of onus on her and her new position, but it's where we need to be. We need to understand and address the internal waste produced, and I don't even know where it is. I don't know where to point and what to do and how to get there without her knowledge and her ability to get us there. So again, not having that dedicated resource and identifying and examining and delving into the root cause of the waste has been a void in our process for I'm going to say a considerable length of time. So I'm really excited about her joining the city. Look forward to that partnership between her and I, and I'm looking forward to moving that dial. Just get it moved. We've got to show that we're moving in the right direction here.
And so, Sue, for you, where do you see the most potential for reduction in municipalities around the things that they're buying?
Yeah, I think there's a couple different ways to look at it. So it might be the waste, but also the impact. And so you could take a look whether that's locally or across the life cycle of the item. You can also take a look at the toxicity of the item. Some things, pesticides or oil or whatever, can be small in volume, but they can have quite a big impact. And then you can also take a look at the volume of materials. So the low-hanging fruit will really be the things that are ordered the most or things in the largest amounts, looking for things that aren't needed. the City of Vancouver did a really good project in terms of looking at their own waste, as Jane mentioned. That's a good place to start. And then they realized that we don't need a waste bin in every single office or a recycle bin in every single office. We should have these collection things out in the hallways. Take a look at things that are single use, things that could be repaired, things that have non-toxic alternatives, things that have leasing models, and things that staff are asking for, because then that there'll be some support and a champion within a department that might want to run with it. Beyond the low-hanging fruit, other ideas might be to collectively work together and map out, okay, where are the really, really hard things to address. So for example, the City of Richmond has been piloting the use of recycled asphalt in its paving projects. So imagine if a group like the BC Social Procurement Initiative coordinated the interest to say, like, oh, here's 10 problem areas, which community wants to take on which ones, do that deeper dive, do the pilots, and then share the results. Because really all of the waste that we have is something we bought. So, how do we stop buying waste, essentially?
Yeah, and those kind of practices, like you talk about, like there's the broader procurement. Are you seeing, do you have any other sort of, like the City of Richmond looking at that? Are there other practices that you're seeing that you get excited about that local governments are doing to move towards zero waste?
Well, I think I think what I like to see is some of the championing of things. So certainly the communities that have been taking the lead on banning single-use plastics, or the ones that are banning bottled water within their own facilities, or putting out more water fountains. Back in the day, I think City of Vancouver was one of the first ones to really try to get a lot more sustainable purchasing happening. And then some of the communities that helped to start up the earlier version of BC Sustainable Social Procurement Initiative. So those were some good champions. But there's lots of innovation that's happening across different communities. And so having a platform to share it is really important.
Yeah, thank you. So Jane, you talked about the importance of finding, like, staffing somebody whose job it is to understand those things and to do the mapping and to really, like, dig down into those pieces. And before that, though, City of Nanaimo developed a zero waste policy and a strategy around that. I'm wondering if you could talk to us about the pathway that led towards the development of that policy and strategy.
Yeah, so two things at play. We've got the sustainable procurement policy, very near and dear to my heart. But what I'm noting is that we don't have a zero waste policy. So it's where we need to be, but it's not where we are. Emma, can you pop the chat into the chat, the link to the zero waste initiatives? That would be great. Thank you. So we've done a lot of great work. But where's our framework? Where's our policy? Where are all the calls to action? So you'll find in this link, for those who are interested, the city's initiative on the single-use plastics. So we are one of those. We have that work. We have a policy that says we're not doing that anymore. And if you go to a store, you have to bring your own grocery bags. And again, it's a change management piece. Lots of people didn't get on board real fast. And you heard in the grocery stores, I got to buy my bags. Like the whole conversation about, yeah, and why, and being able to be part of that and just driving that change. Again, two things at play. We've got the procurement policy, which helps now drive some more of that change in other areas. And again, near and dear to my heart. And as stated earlier, our city council adopted our sustainable procurement policy in early 2021. So we're just on the precipice of implementing and moving all this forward. But along with that procurement policy, we developed a toolbox, and maybe I'll just dive into how
Jane, can I just ask you just to clarify? Because you have your zero waste policy that's been created, but what I was thinking about was in your procurement policy, in your sustainability priorities, you have underneath environmental a specific policy under zero waste. right? So you've identified that within your sustainable procurement policy. And so I just wanted to have maybe a little bit more of like your process of how you guys came to including that zero waste within your sustainable procurement policy, recognizing, of course, that underneath that then becomes your whole zero waste policies and bringing in the resources underneath it. But I just want to recognize like that you put, like, you're one of the organizations that put zero waste right into your procurement policy. So yeah.
I see. So yes, absolutely. And again, give credit where credit's due. This is our council. This is our city council. They are very in tune with this, and they're very action oriented in how we move this forward. It's and it's pivotal. It is. You know, how do you get your vendor community or even your community at large to understand if you don't have this written down and you don't have policies in place? So yeah, sorry, Kristi. Yeah, you're absolutely right. We do have that embedded in our procurement policy, and it was working through those elements. You know, what is important? What will drive change, and what will the future look like? So we've adopted it again early 2021, and we're moving it forward with the help of the buying staff.
And we're going to get a little geeky here, so I'm going to stick with you. You and I are going to get a little geeky here because it's really important. Like and I put the link to the Nanaimo Sustainable Procurement Policy in because it's beautiful. Like it's and the work that Jane's done to bring this and to go through and the council members. And I think the question that came into the chat is a really key thing. Is like when you take a policy that has been traditionally been lowest price wins, right? This is lowest price wins for quality. Like that is how procurement is based. And then when you see what Nanaimo has done with their policy and that they've outlined their sustainability priorities that include environmental protections, and you can see number 2, you have climate action number 1, number 2 is zero waste. So here we are talking a bit about that, but underneath that, you can see the social priorities as well: diversity, local employment, inclusion, and ethical. And that's referencing what Jane said at the beginning, which is environmental, social, ethical. And so, you know, as one of the champions who's been in this role of going through, can you give us like how long did it take? Like, just give us a bit of like a story of how long did it take for you to start, and then the process of then coming to a place where this kind of policy came into being. And I know it was multi-years. So I just want to flag that it was multi-years. But if you could give us like the top 3 things that helped in the process of developing this policy, that would be really helpful.
I gotta say, number 1 with a bullet is resources. You know, everybody knows they're sitting at their desk, they've got 100 priorities, all looking to be number 1. And in order to move this forward, resourcing it is critical. You know, without that, you don't move. Because the priorities change on a daily basis, and things have to slide because you've only got so many hours in the day. So resourcing. The second is subject matter experts. BCSPI. Leverage what's been done before and what's working and what's there. It's don't reinvent the wheel if you don't have to. If it aligns with your strategic goals and it aligns with where you want to be, leverage that. It's absolutely critical. And I know that over time, it took us a long time because we kept losing the resources that we needed to be able to move this forward. So we would start and we stopped and we started and we stopped again and we started again, and then finally got some momentum. But again, it was because of the resources and because of us leveraging what others had done in the past. So I'm going to say that those are the 2 critical.
I think, yeah. And being like getting to observe and see how you've done that, I would say that was really, and I just want to say, and what I also noticed was your engagement in with senior staff, engagement with council. Like there was it's that engagement and community building. And I'm going to there's a great question in the chat that I'm going to come back to, but I want to, this question, Sue's going to kind of lead into it, which is really important, which is, what are some of the arguments that you see that support or dissuade a zero waste council, like a zero waste approach from like a council perspective? Like, let's talk about like the system or mind shift change that takes place.
Yeah, I mean, I guess things that might be a challenge to address are, as a counselor, if you felt like you were the only counselor who cared about this, if you felt like staff weren't really excited about it, sometimes it's a lack of knowledge. I mean, there's definitely some limits around trade agreements, but I think there's also a lot of misinformation about how much that can handcuff you. And then understanding those connections with the other issues. So zero waste is sometimes siloed off under solid waste, but really a lot of communities now are linking with their economic development, their procurement, their planning systems, their building facility operations, and also some of their community engagement. I think also there is that need to hire staff. It's great to have a good intention, but as Jane mentioned, if you don't have somebody to implement it, you will have a beautiful plan on a shelf. But I think it also provides a huge opportunity, and a lot of communities are embracing it also as part of their climate change strategy. It's also about fostering local economies, and especially as we've seen over the past many events, it can really help with the resilience of your community when you're not relying on just-in-time ordering from something far away that you may or may not be able to get anymore. So I think there really needs to be investment in systems change. And so that will cost money. That's sometimes a barrier, but ultimately there should also be savings and other benefits. So I think sometimes we have focused too narrowly on price and we haven't looked at value and what those broader impacts are. And it might just be price to my department, and I don't care if it's starting to be a cost to another department, but as we start to look at things a bit more globally, it can be helpful. And in Whistler, there can be social benefits as well. In Whistler, the municipality provides very low lease rates to Whistler Community Services, and they run the Reuse It and Rebuild It centers, but the revenue that they generate through those programs then help to fund our food bank and outreach counseling and so many of their other programs. So I think there can be a lot of benefits. It's just good to have that broader perspective that sometimes we don't always have.
Yeah. And I think that that's sort of like that council and system shift. And I'm wondering, Jane, if you can talk about kind of when you think about that sustainable procurement piece and within that we have, but just generally, like, what do you see as sort of like the staff shifts? Like, and this is the question that came up in the chat, is how do you get your staff on side to also begin to integrate this kind of thinking and integrate your social, environmental, and ethical outcomes? And can you talk about sort of like the systems and staff change that occurs within the organization?
Yeah, it's an interesting mind shift indeed, but it has to be that trickle down effect. If you don't have buy-in from the top, it's really hard to push that up the hill. So give credit where credit's due. Council has been so supportive and the driving force behind this, but senior leadership as well. You know, it took a little bit, I won't lie, it took a little bit to bring them all on side and all on board, but they're all getting it in their own right. But our staff, our purchasing staff, has been the ultimate amazing. They were ready long before we were. They were ready to take that toolbox and move it out into every procurement opportunity that was in front of them. And again, our sustainable procurement policy doesn't really have a stick. It's sort of this aspirational, this is where we want to get to, because it's the first iteration of it. And we didn't want to say, you know, thou must, and then find out the vendor community wasn't ready. And then we were going to lose bidders and that repercussions. So when we started to peel back the layers of this onion, not only was purchasing staff ready, but we had already pockets of operational staff that were tackling this in their own right and building into their own procurements how they wanted to roll it out. So it's been really organic. It's really interesting to see, and it's really gaining momentum. In my mind, it's already got that momentum that we don't want to lose. So it's going to be interesting over the course of the next few years to see how far we can move that dial.
And so we're like, in thinking about the vendor community, we're talking about like, there's the role that procurement plays, because when you buy stuff, there's waste, right? Like we're talking about that connection of when you buy stuff, there's waste. And so there's the thinking through how municipalities and how local governments and how people think about not only what they buy, but then how they manage disposal side of it. I'm wondering what's being asked from suppliers, like from when you purchase, like, are you seeing that the vendor community is able to respond and then are being able to think about how they recycle their waste, how they reduce their waste? Like, what are you seeing as sort of like the overall like system? And you talked a little bit back here about extended producer responsibility programs. And I'm wondering if you can talk about that, like what that is and how that engages like the supplier and the whole system.
Sure. So yeah, a lot of questions in there.
I know, sorry, that was sort of like a train of thought, and at the end.
It's all good. I'll answer some,
yeah.
and then if I've forgotten some, let me know. But
Yes.
extended producer responsibility is meant to be where producers are responsible for their products at the end of the life cycle as well. To date, there are some voluntary ones, but most of them have been under the recycling regulation that the Ministry of Environment and Climate Change Strategy has. And so things like our tires, the residential packaging and printed paper, pesticides, gas, light bulbs, all kinds of things. Not all of those programs, although a lot of them will apply to all of the products. So all lighting, like lamps and lighting equipment, are regulated. But obviously the packaging and printed paper so far is just for residential. And those programs are required to develop plans and submit them to the province. Right now, if you're worried about the printed packaging and paper, the Recycle BC program has its consultation open until the end of December. But the programs to date haven't been super effective in terms of affecting design change, although that is part of the goal of them. They're meant to, put those costs back on the producer, so the producers start to be like, oh, why are we wrapping a t-shirt in paper and then putting it in a cardboard box and then wrapping that in plastic and then putting it on a pallet and then wrapping that in plastic when the consumer or our vendor or customer only wants the t-shirt. And so I think that's where procurement can help to drive things even in advance of those programs becoming more broad, because also a lot of those producers aren't changing things for a market of 5 million, but as there is a Canada-wide plan. So as we get more things across Canada, and also there's a lot of action in the States, then it'll start to shift things. But I remember applying for or responding to an RFP where they were like, okay, you as your company, what is your carbon footprint? What is your waste footprint? What actions are you taking? And while it didn't change how I was doing things immediately, because it was asking about things in the past, it was really nice to see that, oh, there's an interest in that, because a lot of times you'll hear from producers, we are just making what the customer demands. And so this is one way of showing there is some demand for something in a different way. And it starts to have that conversation. I think Jane had a really good point where she said the vendors might not always be ready for it, but help them start to be ready for it by asking those questions and saying, this is the direction we're heading. And we want to reward people who are heading in that direction, so that you can help to create that shift.
And that's exactly was my next question back to Jane, was to say, some of the things that sometimes we hear is that, by adding in these kind of requirements around zero waste or about, producer responsibility or so on, that can impact small vendors and can impact supply chain. And so I'm wondering about, from Jane, your perspective, does zero waste and these such policies create additional barriers within the procurement process, especially to small contractors, and how can this be overcome?
Well, it's an interesting dilemma, and I don't think we can't get there without our vendor community, and I think that communication link is so key. Does it create a barrier? I think it does if we don't engage. I think if we're not explaining to them what it is we're trying to achieve and allow them the opportunity to tell their own story, absolutely. And those small and medium-sized businesses are critical to our vendor pool, so we have to be able to get them there, and in doing so bring them along so that they're able to compete. But if I may, I have 2 stories that I want to share.
I'd love stories.
One is our shining star, and to Sue's point, putting into bidding opportunities the requirement for zero waste. So lighting renewal projects, recreation facilities, the lighting has to come out. It's end of life. It's energy sucking stuff. So in the process of developing the specifications, not only did we identify that the new lighting could be a little bit better and reduce the energy consumption, not only did we identify that, we identified the fact that the old fixtures could be split down into recyclable pieces, and the packaging could also come in a shape and form that could all be recycled. Nothing goes to the landfill. And be it as it may, low bid wins sometimes works. And here's where we put into the opportunity. We weren't going to evaluate on this stuff. This is mandatory. So by bidding, you're agreeing to all of this. And Emma, if you can pop into the chat the link to the opportunity, so that if anybody's interested, please feel free, use the CASE method, and CASE stands for copy and steal everything. We use it a lot. But this is an opportunity that said to the vendor community, we're not interested in dialogue about this. We're hard coding this in. This is what you're going to do. And credit to the successful bidders, they followed it to the letter. And we've got 2 opportunities. I think we've got 3 more coming up this next year. So all of this is diversion. All of this it's getting us to a new lighting system in the recreation facilities, but hopefully not impacting the waste. The second opportunity is one that's going to make your toes curl. So dispensers in bathrooms. Apparently this is a thing for me. So if you ever go into a bathroom, into a washroom, you'll see the dispensers there. There's in each of the stalls, there's the toilet tissue. By the sinks, there's the hand soap, and then there's the towels. And there's at least, in one bathroom, there's at least 3 dispensers. In the city of Nanaimo, there's 1,000 dispersed amongst our facilities. Manufacturers manufacture those dispensers so that they're proprietary to the size of the paper, soap, what have you, that goes into those. A mandate for procurement is fair, open, transparent, and to develop competition. But if you go to market for this, the successful bidder is going to tell you, and again, if it's not the incumbent, the successful bidder, the first words out of their mouth is, we're going to pull all 1,000 of those dispensers down. We're going to send them to the landfill, or we may recycle them responsibly. Yeah, but they're pulling them all off. They're all workable, usable. They worked yesterday, they're good today, but no, our size of our paper or soap or whatever is not going to fit there, so we're going to pull them all off. And in all conscience, I'm not going to add more waste to make a successful procurement. It's in my mind, and again, we have in our policy, in our procurement policy, we have to go to market every 5 years. So every 5 years, we have the potential of pulling off 1,000 dispensers off the walls so that we can meet our 5-year recycle contract. So this one gets me a little hot under the collar, because manufacturers won't change. They like that business model. And for me, it really drives home where, legislation and policies really need to take a role in diverting that and changing that, so that small procurement folks like me at the City of Nanaimo can have their say in, what, I want best value. I don't want to continue to award to the same incumbent because I don't want to take those dispensers down. but it's a road uphill that I'm.
Well, and I think what you highlight though is again, like thinking through all of the things that we think might be little purchases that then end up being big purchases. And so, and that those big purchases again have the whole thing and how things are designed to fit into zero waste policies or zero waste thinking, and how that impacts, you know, all those different ways up and down the supply chain, right? Like it really is about, you know, and again, like Vince was talking about that extended producer's responsibility. It's from the beginning to the end. And, you know, and so that it's like each of the things it's beginning to integrate into all of our thinking, you know, not only that what we buy matters and has that social environmental impact, everything we buy has an end life. And how do we really think about that? And it's that starting at the beginning. It's like, okay, we have to think that end life. How do we start at the beginning and begin to ask that same question to our producers, and using procurement as a powerful tool to drive this change, right? I had a story that came out once that said, you know, at one point the federal government decided that they were going to purchase only post-consumer recycled paper, right? And before that, you know, recycled paper was not really a thing. And it was a niche product that, you know, people who were doing recycled paper were trying to get into the market. And when the federal government made that decision, it then opened up a market for something that changed the industry and began to shift the way we thought about paper, right? And so that piece of government procurement being a leader and developing markets is really powerful. And so we often put that in federal government or provincial government because they're big buyers, but local governments also collectively are huge buyers and have the ability to be leaders. And also local governments are often the government that has to deal with waste, has to manage landfills, has to, you know, like this is part of sometimes our local government system too. So I think that this conversation about remembering that even if at a smaller institutional purchase level, even at a small local government level, and at BCSPI, we have some very small organizations, you know, communities of 1,500 people or so on, all of these pieces up to bigger ones like Nanaimo, one of our biggest members, you know, like that's our, but you know, are all of us together are creating that difference. So no matter what it is. So Jane, I love your story about, you know, thinking about the things we don't even think about, right? And how that shift of thinking. So I wanted, before we get to questions, and I see we've got some good ones, I just would love to have Sue, big picture, like what do you think is possible? Like if you could have your way, what do you think is possible? And then I'm going to ask Jane, what do you think is possible? And then I see questions have come into the chat. And so we'll have a chance to get to those questions.
Yeah, so I think you're right on, Kristi, when you're talking about that collective impact. And so something I'm quite excited about is that the BC government has committed to developing a circular economy strategy at a provincial level. And that's something that local governments have been asking. There's, you know, two resolutions, one for zero waste strategy and one for a circular economy strategy at the UBCM convention. And there's also groups pushing the federal government to do something similar. So this is a really key time for local governments and organizations and people who are excited about this to be thinking about what does an economic system look like that values materials and people and the environment over throughput look like. So we have held some workshops with local governments, First Nations communities, and environmental groups to spark thoughts around that. But really, I encourage all of you to think about that. We're hoping that the province will be rolling out some kind of engagement in early 2023. But from a procurement perspective, imagine if the province had their procurement aligned also with similar principles, and that you were then getting, you know, the universities and crown corporations and healthcare institutions also doing it. That's a huge amount of purchasing power that can help to design or drive change. And so really hoping to maximize those beneficial impacts of that purchasing. And then you could really help to shift design and things. You would really have a lot of vendors that were interested in things. And we could link those sorts of things across the country, because the Recycling Council of Ontario changed their name to the Circular Innovation Council. And circular procurement is one of their key things that they're focusing on. So I think there's a lot of potential for that. And so, yeah, I'm hoping that all of you will put your thinking caps on for what we need at the provincial level to help support the work that's been happening locally.
How about you, Jane? What do you think is possible? Like what gets you excited?
Oh my goodness. So I'm just using the last year as a snapshot. And to me, the sky is the limit right now. We have the ability to do so much and in so many categories, because it's not just, that one-off buy. It's where are we at? And again, zero waste, define it, move it forward, impose it on our vendor community, bring them on board, bring them on side, and just commodity by commodity, we're going to make a difference. And I am very excited to see what the next few years has to bring.
Great. Well, thank you. I'm gonna come back to some of the questions we've received in the chat, and if people have questions, please pop in. So one of them, I think, we'll start with Jane, and it was specifically around vendor outreach. And I'll also ask Sue about this as well. Like, how do you find sort of like the most effective way to engage with small vendors to help them make the shift alongside you? And has the city been doing that? So that's a direct question. And then my question will also then go to Sue, that same thing, is what do you see as sort of as best practices in helping producers and vendors make this shift? So let's start with Jane and then Sue.
Yeah, so I made a decision early on, right or wrong, that we weren't going to make a big splash announcement, because I'm really about timely advice and timely communications. I didn't want to lose momentum if we, you do a big splash and you've got vendors who are really excited and you go and look and, well, we're not going to contract for that for another 3 years. So I didn't want to lose that momentum. Alternatively, I thought that when we're going to market, when we're about to publish, let's have the communication then. Get the vendor input, get the vendor communication going at that point in time. I think that's critical, because then it gets them thinking about it, and then they have the opportunity to tell their story in the document. And again, if you're not sure, don't impose a lot of criteria, but get them to tell their story, because maybe those small medium don't have the big, zero waste policy. You've got all the documentation, but they tell really good stories about how they get there. So use the tools in your toolbox and use that as an evaluation criteria to not lose them in the evaluation. Get your best value proposition in front of you and do those kind of procurements. Don't go low bid if you're going to go imposing these things and you're not sure the vendor community is ready. So for me, it's timely, and it's when those opportunities present themselves. I think that's our best strategy going forward, until we've gone a few cycles and pretty much the whole vendor community is aware of what we're trying to achieve.
There's some really important nuggets in there that we hear across, which is exactly that. Like, make sure that you're timely in terms of that outreach. And allowing some description rather than prescription at the start, right? How about you, Sue? What would you say is sort of like the pieces that you've seen around helping the vendor community make a shift?
Yeah, I think some of the interesting work has been done with the City of Victoria, because they're trying to support having reusable coffee cups. And so they're, I think, one of the first local governments to be really doing that deeper dive, which means they're having to create things as they go along. So it has been about engaging with the vendors to see, to what scale, especially with local governments, you can purchase things, but being restricted in terms of how much support you can provide to local businesses. So trying to find out what things would be helpful, what scale are they ready to be able to deliver, and how do you also not pick, like, how do you create a whole little ecosystem of multiple companies that are all thriving rather than picking a winner and then squashing the other ones? So I think they've been doing a bunch of interesting work in terms of understanding that. And then one of the things, and you guys can maybe correct me if it's right or wrong, but one of the comments that came up when we were engaging with other local governments is, I think some of the challenges they had found is that when the criteria were developed, they might not have envisioned all the different scenarios that could come up. And so sometimes I think they had felt that they had to award a contract to a company that wasn't necessarily going to have the best environmental outcomes or the best social outcomes, but the way that the RFP had been set up was that was how they had to do it. So I don't know if, and the other comment was something about not being able to award points for positive things. It was only sort of like detracting. And so they had wanted to be able to say, well, this company, hires a certain group of people or has these local environmental benefits, but they weren't able to. And so I think that speaks to the need for really careful thought. And they thought that there might also need to be the change at some provincial level to empower local governments to do things a different way.
Great, thank you. And criteria keeps coming up. So I want to go back to Jane, which is, and I know like criteria turns up in different ways in different RFPs. So one of the things we can do as a follow-up is send out an RFP that shows an example of how criteria has happened. But I'm wondering, Jane, if you have any examples of criteria for this.
Yeah, absolutely. Again, when you're looking to get a vendor to tell the story, because you're not sure, that I think that's the best opportunity. Is the criteria isn't, it's an ask, it's show us how, or describe, or tell us in under under any sustainable criteria. And again, yes, you have to balance it with price. For municipal government, of course, we're not going to pay the most expensive, but we want that balance, and we want quality, and we want service, and we want, but we need to balance that. And again, we started very, very small. Some of our criteria might only be 3 to 5%. It's not the tipping point, it's not the decision making, but it's the message sending. We're heading in this direction. Please get your ducks in a row. Maybe this is only a 1-year contract and we're going to ask again next year. So think about it and give us a good story. The other part of that is that when vendors are unsuccessful in a value proposition opportunity, so request for proposal, tell us your stories, take advantage of those debriefs. And yes, it is mandatory. Organizations have to give those debriefs to unsuccessful who ask, and give them the tools in their toolbox. Tell them why they didn't score well in that criteria. Tell them what the city's expectations are. Give them the opportunity to understand how we want to move forward. And that gives them the opportunity to go away and think about it. Maybe they're not proposing on the City of Nanaimo's, in the next coming weeks, but City of Victoria might be publishing, Cowichan Valley Regional District might be publishing. Somebody else is going to be asking something similar. So get yourself organized and get yourself understanding what the requirements are.
Great, thank you so much. So, and I also want to note that Emma popped back to the vendor engagement piece. Emma did pop into the chat, the BC Social Procurement Initiative's vendor outreach guide that has some, again, was developed in partnership and from the experience of our member communities on how they're engaging and different things to think about. So that is a free resource that anyone can access and take a look at too. So I'm noticing our time, so I want to make sure that we land right on time and so on. So I'm going to come back to kind of like my final question for Sue and Jane, is that I'm going to start with Jane, which is, what advice to municipal staff, what advice do you have for municipal staff in integrating zero waste and sustainable policies into existing procurement processes and policies? What advice do you have? You can pick like the most important thing you've learned in the last 2 or 3 years in terms of your advice.
Start. It's just, I think that's the best advice I can give, because we started with a policy but that was me. I thought I needed a place to point to. But when we, like I said, when we started to peel back the onions, layers of the onion, we noticed that people had already started. So leverage what people have done before you, leverage what's there, just start, because that's the best way to get the momentum.
Thank you. And Sue, what advice would you give to councils and communities in integrating zero waste into procurement policies and process? Again, that's sort of big picture.
Yeah, I would echo Jane, start. Yeah, like I think at the council level, you know, ideally BC Social Procurement Initiative could maybe give a talk at UBCM, and so that there's raising awareness in councils of what is possible. And then within the communities, I think, you know, if you're creating a zero waste strategy, develop a committee and have that committee help to develop the strategy as well as help to show how it's implemented. I think it's always good to try to collaborate locally and show the local impacts. Get other community groups engaged. And I see some of the questions in the chat are about, like, what are examples? What are criteria? And I think that's something that could be made available to not just local governments, but lots of businesses. I mean, we see particularly with those compostable containers, a lot of businesses wanted to do the right thing. There's a lot of greenwashing around. So I think helping people sort through some of that greenwashing when they want to do the right thing, so they're not vulnerable to awesome marketing without a lot of actual delivery, would be really good. And then also reporting back on what worked, what didn't, what the challenges are, so that people can start to see, you know, how they can help on different things, and setting that direction so that people are more ready for the changes that will be coming.
Thank you. And I know we didn't get to all the questions in the chat, so some of them are specific, and I'm going to say, I think Shannon, you had some specific questions around criteria and RFPs, and you know, Squamish is a member of the BC Social Procurement Initiative. I'm going to suggest that we deepen the conversation or connect you directly to Jane, and also we can talk about that in our community of practice, and other people that have specific questions around that. What we do with the Purchasing Power series, as well as we produce a summary of the questions in the conversation, and that's also a way for the questions that we weren't able to catch, we can put those into the summary and allow for ways to access those different resources to help move this forward. So all of the suggestions from Sue around continuing the conversation, to continuing to provide those examples and how it works. I do want to note that on the BC Social Procurement Initiative webpage, we have case studies, and so you can go and look at all the different, and we have one that's coming out really soon from the regional district of Nanaimo around their mattress recycling process and how they did that. And that gets into, like, here's their RFP, here's the criteria, this is the example of how it is. So those resources and examples are there. Feel free to check that out. We continue to add on them, but also those specific questions we capture, and we'll be able to respond to those when we send out recording, as well as our summary of today. So I want to say a big, huge thank you to Jane and Sue for sharing your years developed expertise and hard-won wisdom. It's critical to come and share that, and to share what you've learned, but also thank you for everybody who turned up to think about how you can do that in your own role in your community, and how we can move away from sort of like this torrent of waste that's coming into our communities, and move into a more recyclable, regenerative, reusable, reduction, all those R words that are so good to shifting us to zero waste. Coming up in February, we continue on our Purchasing Power series, and we're going to talk about how can procurement help address poverty. And so we're going to have Tamarack Institute that works across BC with local governments around poverty and you know, social inclusion issues. And then we're going to have examples from Edmonton. And reason from Edmonton is they have a specific integrated poverty reduction strategy that has really thought through how procurement does that. So we want to invite everyone to join us, and it would be great to have you. And then following that, we have a couple more that are also being scheduled, such as one on housing. How can procurement support affordable housing? So big questions, big topics, and it's great to have everybody here. So once again, thank you to Sue, thank you to Jane, and I hope everybody has a restful and peaceful, happy holidays.